Welcome back to the table. Today, Emily and I are going to give you a look, although it's not going to be a preview, but we're going to be talking about our experience playing Witchwood. This is the newest expansion for Destinies. It's on GameFound right now, in fact, by the time you're seeing this. And we had a chance to play it, and we thought to ourselves after playing it, now, I've played Destinies.
I have not played Destinies at all before.
Yeah, she hasn't played it at all, so we're going to come with a perspective of someone who's never played it. So we can tell you a little bit about Destinies in general if you've never played it. And then also someone with just mildly more experience, because I've only played a couple of the scenarios, maybe 2 of the scenarios or more, out of the base box of the original Destinies. So we can then kind of shift to what was a little different about Witchwood. But first and foremost, I think it was more of Destinies. Like, it was more of that. But I'm curious to hear what you think. From a perspective of someone who's never played, what kind of experience did you get from playing?
Well, I will say it's definitely an exploration game, right?
Yeah.
So we're going out and you have your destiny. There are 2 options of kind of ways you can fulfill it. And so I'm reading those and thinking like, what do I want to do in this game? Where am I going to go? And it's kind of you can travel around a map, you can interact with points of interest, and you're kind of talking to people, you're getting items, you're learning about new things, you're interacting in different ways. And as it went on, what I found most interesting for me as the first-time Destinies player is when David would do things, he would be interacting with the map in different places. And we were kind of like always apart from each other. But he would learn information and I would be like, oh, actually, that is helpful for me to know too, because little did we know some of our destinies overlapped, right? And so sometimes when he would ask random people about things or about his destiny, I'd be like, oh, that's where I have to go, or that's the item I need, or that's what I'm going to have to do later on to kind of fulfill what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, that is really cool. And I don't know, like I said, I have not played all of the scenarios from the earlier expansions, but I think all of the scenarios, or most of them, there's overlap on your destiny. So each person has a character if you've never played, and there are sort of 2 quests or destinies on the back of your card. And these are things that you can follow. In fact, they're things you have to follow and try to achieve to win the game. And you can do either or. This is not going to be ever the case, I don't think, where you're doing both. Because to win the game, you want to achieve what's happening here, and then you kind of go into the end game, if you will.
That being said, though, you can ask about both destinies at different times, or you could kind of like start on one and then be like, oh no, never mind, I'm not going to do that because this has become much harder than I thought. Maybe I'll try to go down the other path, or now that I have this item, maybe that other path is a little bit easier. So you don't have to like commit first turn, this is the destiny I'm going to, and this is what's going to happen. And there's like a lot of exploration in this game, right? So as items come out, as you learn more information, you're like, oh, I'm pretty sure that's what that item goes to. Or like, oh, I think this person will probably be used for this later. And you're kind of trying to piece it all together as you learn, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, that is cool, and that's the same in Destinies as it was here. We don't want to spoil anything. We will be showing you the top down here, so if you don't want to see that, this is effectively what the end game map of the first scenario of Witchwood looks like. But you are exploring quite a bit, and I think one of the cool things, like you said, that I remember from my first experience playing Destinies, was that moment where you are sitting there just listening, because the rule at the table is when things are read off of the app, you are reading them out loud for the table. And I believe that the designers involved with this had that in mind, because that is a moment that everyone experiences. Because I'm sitting there and she's talking to someone who's like, oh, if only I had a drink of something.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, well, I happen to have some mead that I bought over here, so maybe I'll go check that out. But the thing is, if you're playing with 3 people in particular, that might be related to a destiny you don't have on the back of your card. So I'm not sure if there's like potentially some red herrings to follow, but those sorts of things happen. You never know what to expect in this game. And the other thing about the exploration is you definitely get the sense that this is a living world. And that was one of my biggest takeaways from the original game. In the first scenario of the original Destinies, there's this sort of like giant mound of rats. And it's a really disgusting idea, and it's kind of a gross little miniature. But when we first started playing, it was in this area, and we thought, oh, that's another point of interest that you can go to.
Okay.
And
I don't think I'd go to it.
No, probably not. She hates rats. The mound of rats was just another point of interest. And like a point-and-click adventure, Like a lot of people relate this to a choose your own adventure. I think it's like a point and click adventure from a computer. You go there and you could encounter the rats, but if no one did, like Emily wouldn't,
No, I would not.
all of a sudden the rats moved sort of on their own, and it made the game feel like it had a life of its own. And it really made the app feel like it was kind of a DM that was controlling things. And the same thing was going on here. There were things that were happening where, like, I'd encounter a caravan and talk to them. They asked for directions. And by the way, spoiler alert, there are caravans asking for directions in this game.
There's a lot of movement going around.
I would suggest always trying to help them, but who knows? Maybe not is a good idea. But I sent them on their way, and they literally left the tile that they were on and disappeared for a couple rounds, maybe. And then all of a sudden, at the beginning of someone's turn, they just appeared at the location that I told them to go to. So clearly, they did follow my directions. But it does a lot of that sort of stuff, so you really feel like, oh, what's going to happen? And then all of a sudden, a new character appears on a tile that you flipped from the very beginning of the game, and you're like, well, what's going on there? And you might be halfway across the map. Now, speaking of that, let's shift to Witchwood.
What is new?
Some of the things are really interesting with the way the map works, and one of those things is traveling. In the original game, you're really just laying out tiles orthogonally adjacent to one another and moving to the next area that are relatively close, quote unquote.
Together, yeah.
In this, there are going to be points of interest that you interact with that might give you the option to travel like a greater distance to maybe a nearby village.
And you're like traveling through the woods, right? So all of this stuff is kind of like there's wooded areas all around you. It's very thematic because as you're traveling, something could happen.
Almost always does.
There's some kind of encounter, like something's rustling in the bushes, or there's a path down there. Do you want to go down? Or other various things can happen, and so it's always kind of ominous as you're traveling through these woods, like what's going to happen? It's dark at night, there's bonfires.
Should you or shouldn't you follow?
Exactly.
Because this game will do anything. Like you could say, oh, you heard rustling in the bushes. Oh, I'll check it out. It was nothing. End of turn.
Yes.
Or something like that. So this game, I would say, lures people a lot more with those distractions. But a lot of that happens during the travel, and when you're traveling, you're going from one point of interest that ends up being another point of an interest on another tile that's not necessarily adjacent. So these effectively are sub-maps that are spread around the board.
Like different little towns.
Yeah, and the app suggests that you're putting them together like this just so that it's probably a smaller footprint.
Yeah.
But literally, these tiles could be up there, this one tile could be by itself, and we've got, 5 different little areas here that are connected by points of interest. This does make it a little bit longer of a haul to make some of your traveling, particularly when everything is revealed.
Some of the items help with that. So if you're good at buying the items you need, you can get some things that'll help you travel a little bit more quickly across the map to different towns. But if you don't have that, it can be a little bit of like, move here and travel there. Move here
in fact,
travel there.
I will spoil this one because it is readily available at every merchant practically, and that's Nightshade is one of the new items that was in the new stack of cards. And by the way, speaking of the cards, you do use the new cards, and if you've never played one of the old expansions, you're always going to use the original cards as well because they have some very standard and generic things you get. But Nightshade lets you do that. And she, I won't spoil this part, did have an encounter with someone that gave her a thing that let her do
Helped
that
a lot.
pretty readily. It did help a lot. I mean, she had to use 3 of her effort die, which takes a while to get all 3 on your table. But when she did that, she could move all the way across the map. I didn't have anything like that, and I wasn't buying Nightshade enough, and I was just at the end plodding along.
Yep. One of the other things that was new, too, that you interacted with a lot was that kind of idea of branching paths.
I did interact with that a lot.
So there's something where, a lot of time you're doing skill checks, right, against the different skills that you can be leveling up. But there's a new thing where you can kind of have this option of going down these like branching different paths.
It's like a maze or a labyrinth.
Yes. And so it has a different icon, and when you go through it, you can kind of choose, like, do you want this option or this option? All right, you chose this one. And now do you want this option or this option or this option? All right, you chose this one. It keeps going, right? And there's so many different endings that you can get to.
There was way more than both of us
Way
thought.
more than I thought. I thought there was going to be like 4. He had done 3 of the 4, and I was like, okay, this is the last one. And then he keeps going, and it keeps going, and it keeps going. I was like, oh, wow, there's a lot going on here in just this little interaction.
Yeah, because within the theme of these forests and things of being able to get lost in them, I was in an area, and I used one of these encounters. And effectively, the choices for this one anyway, and there's probably different kinds, was, okay, do you want to keep going east, or you think you heard
different
something
direction.
to the south?
Yeah.
And there would be all these things that they would dangle in front of you. And this game, Witchwood, if it has one thing that I don't remember from the original, is it dangles a lot of carrots in front of you.
It does.
And that works on me because I tried this thing over and over. And
I
I
like
probably
turn
spent,
after turn
it
after
was,
turn.
If I wanted to win, it was probably a stupid thing to do, but I was having fun doing it.
Yeah.
And I was determined to get through it because I effectively just kept trial and erroring. I'm like, okay, I'll go this direction, then this direction, then this direction. Oh, nope, that's not it. And then I had to get back to that spot the next turn and go a different direction. Finally, I got to the thing and got sort of a satisfying reward that, coincidentally, I'd never figured out what I needed to do with. But it was a cool thing.
It was cool, but I think some of the distractions are interesting in that, like, I got some distractions, right, that I was like, oh, I'll just try to do this. Oh, and I happen to have this. Oh, I'm able to get this item. And then later on, it turned out that was one of the exact items I would need to finish my Destiny. And I was like, this is perfect. So I only ended with 2 things at the end. I think you had like 5 or 6.
I had a ton of cards. But
tableau.
Yeah, she played a better game. But she also had the perfect storm of
she happened here, and then I was here.
She had this encounter and got this thing, and then lo and behold, that thing. And what was cool about that was it wasn't. I know we're dancing around the details here, but we don't want to spoil it. But she got to an ultimate situation where she needed someone to do something for her, and they wanted something, but they weren't exactly like
telling me.
Here is specifically what I want. And she tried to give them something. And their response was like, no, I can't do X, Y, Z with that.
Yeah.
And that communication was like, oh.
I have that, though.
It's this other thing that I have. So she, on her next turn, just tried to give her that, and it worked, which was very cool. But those moments of realizing, oh, I have
had a few moments of that, too, in this game. And I really appreciate that about Destinies, right? Where you have, like, it's not so straightforward that you're like, okay, I'm going to go here, and then I'm going to do this, and that's it, right? And I know exactly what I need to do. There are moments where you're like, I don't really know what I need to do, so I guess I need to interact with the world more or talk to somebody or see if someone knows about where to go from here, because you really do need to explore to understand what's coming up next.
For sure, and that's why I bring up the point-and-click adventure. If you've ever played one of those and you're stuck, you're like, well, I'll click, 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 click. You just start looking around to see what can happen and where you're going to get your information. And in this one, I don't think you had to you didn't roam around too far until you got the stuff. It was pretty cool. Now, one thing we didn't uncover, and I want to show you this because it is one of the cooler miniatures I've seen in a long time. I don't know if this is a spoiler, but they sent it to us. We're showing it to you. If you play the scenario, you might figure out what you're supposed to do. We didn't necessarily put 2 and 2 together, though.
No.
Safe to say, though, in retrospect, we have a good hunch
of where
this would have come into play, but I have no idea what it did. It
didn't even come out for us.
No, this miniature did not touch the board. We did
a lot of exploration.
We did. We were around this map. I'd say in total we went around the map like twice, both of us.
Yes, easily.
And this thing didn't come out. But like I said, I have a hunch.
So do I.
We know where this is going to come into play, but it makes me kind of want to try it again just to see what this does.
How can I get the mini out?
Like, I'm assuming it's a house with all these arms and legs. I'm assuming it's going to be moving around the board kind of like that mound of rats did. But anyway, we didn't see it, which is kind of cool that you can play a scenario of this.
And there's still more.
And not necessarily experience everything there was to experience. But anyway, that was our experience playing the Witchwood, first scenario only. If you have any questions at all, please make them in the comments below. And until next time, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.